Moving along to the weekly rant for episode 113 of Go Tell It to the Wall. This one, it's funny. This one came up recently, and I've talked about it a little before, but I felt the need to really talk about it again because it's timely and it's in the news. And that would be insensitive team names and mascots in professional sports. That's right, insensitive team names and mascots in professional sports. If you've listened to the podcast for a long time, in fact, the very first month that we were a podcast, the Go Tell It to the Wall existed, the Chicago Cubs played the Cleveland baseball team in the World Series. And I have long before that and long since then refused to use their team name when talking about the Cleveland baseball team because it is that insensitive. They aren't the only culprits of this. In fact, I will use this team name because it's not the name so much that's insensitive, but it's the things they do. The Atlanta Braves were bounced out of the MLB playoffs yesterday. They came into a little bit of controversy. Not unsurprisingly, they actually played the St. Louis Cardinals in this round of the playoffs. And one of the pitchers for the St. Louis Cardinals is actually an indigenous person. He's an indigenous person attached to a tribe, and actually I believe it's a tribe in Florida, if I remember correctly. This is no disrespect to him. There's so much on my plate that I couldn't get through like all of the details of exactly how he's connected. But he pitches for the St. Louis Cardinals. He brought up the fact of how insensitive it is that the Atlanta Braves have this chant, and they do this, what they call a tomahawk chop. I'm doing finger quotes for those of you that are only listening to the audio. The tomahawk chop. And they do this throughout the game, and they're waving their hands. And I'm not doing it to be insensitive for those of you that are watching on the video. I'm just giving you an example. An example. And in fact, they embrace this. They have, oh, Kevin, good timing. They embrace this fact. They like to pretend they don't, but they embrace this to the point that their Twitter account is actually called Chop Talk. It's called Chop Talk, their official Atlanta Braves Twitter account. Well, of course, because this pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals came out and pointed out how insensitive it is, the Braves decided they had to do something. Exactly, Kevin, racists. They decided they had to do something. And instead of saying, you know what, we're going to make our fans stop doing this, they said, we're going to reduce the tomahawk chop among our fans. Not instruct them to not do the chop. What they did was they didn't give out the foam, like tomahawk things that they give, usually at these games, and they expected that all their fans would no longer do this tomahawk chop. Well, of course that wasn't the case. The only way that we're going to stop this with a team like the Braves, the Atlanta Braves in Major League Baseball, is telling your fans to stop. And then you're going to enforce it. You're going to enforce it because if you see fans start to do something insensitive like that, then they are removed from the stadium. Simple as that. And then on top of that, we got to change these names. We have the Cleveland baseball team and the Washington NFL football team with incredibly insensitive team names and mascots. Incredibly. Both of these are just straight racist. There's no way of getting around it. And these days, you cannot claim ignorance anymore. Because this is known. This isn't 20, 30 years ago when it was kind of like, okay, a few people are complaining, yeah, you know. There's no claiming ignorance. And then if you want to sit back and you want to say, well, the tradition of the Washington football team, the tradition? Your tradition does not go back further than the indigenous people on this continent. It simply doesn't. Professional sports teams, at the max, you're getting 100 years. And that's at the max. We're talking college teams, baseball teams. And that's not the Atlanta baseball team. They're not 100 years old. They're closer to it. But the Washington football team, not even close. The Cleveland baseball team, not even close to 100 years. Can't claim ignorance anymore. And then there's the other one. I'm not offended by it. Just because you're not offended doesn't mean it's not offensive. I've said this before on this podcast. If even one person is offended, we need to sit back and look at why we are offending that person. But when you're talking about an entire race of people that are offended, then it's too bad for you. That's great that you're not offended, but you're doing something offensive. You're doing something offensive. The bottom line, stop. Completely stop it. Hashtag, Kevin, stop the chop. Stop the chop. And change the team name. See, I'll be okay with like Braves, but take away the indigenous people like the tomahawk and all this stuff. Like, you want to be called the Braves, that's fine, but take out the insensitive stuff. The Washington football team and the Cleveland baseball team, name's got to be changed, period. Got to be changed. That's it, period. And in fact, it's gotten so ridiculous, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in entertainment news, but there were some news outlets that posted an insensitive story title, and it just said, Braves scalped. Think about that. Braves scalped. Do better, be better. We're all capable of being better, and hopefully one day we will get to that point. We just have to be loud enough about it and make sure that these teams do better and respect all people. Period. Bottom line. That's that.